All right, welcome to Cwic Show. We are talking in this episode about the Thomas Jefferson statue removal. This is very significant. Many in the media and online are going to say that it's not very significant, but you're going to see here in a moment that they went over the exact same process of denial, of pushback in the media when the Confederate statues were being pulled down a few years back in 2017. This statue of Thomas Jefferson is 188 years old. It was placed there in New York City in 1833. What's interesting is you have a 9-member commission that votes to remove the statue. This is an unelected commission, right? Every member of this commission is unelected. They are appointed by the mayor, de Blasio of New York City, to, I would guess, come up with a decision on this that they already know what the decision is going to be. This statue was gifted to the city in 1834 by Uriah Phillips Levy, the nation's first Jewish naval commodore and an admirer of Jefferson's belief in religious freedom. So we want to remember here, what does Jefferson represent? That's what the fight is about, right? This is the debate. What does Jefferson represent? For some, it's everything bad and nothing good. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence at the age of 33. He wrote that document in 3 days. He was also the driving force behind Madison's Bill of Rights. What does Jefferson represent? Perhaps only George Washington is a greater figure of the founding of America than Thomas Jefferson. A brilliant political mind. On April 29th, 1962, then President John F. Kennedy, at a dinner honoring Nobel Prize winners, said the following, I quote, "I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge, that has ever been gathered at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." Here's the problem. Thomas Jefferson owned over 600 slaves, 400 of them at Monticello. This is what New York City Council member Adrian Adams said. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder who owned over 600 human beings. This is true. What is Thomas Jefferson being remembered for? On the other side of this argument, American history professor at Princeton University, Sean Willents, said in a letter to the commission, I quote, "Removal of the Pierre-Jean David d'Alger statue of Thomas Jefferson from City Hall would be a direct attack on the symbol of the democratic values New Yorkers hold dear." Again, what does he represent? What is the symbol of Thomas Jefferson? Well, we can make that pretty much into anything we really want to. Some can make it into a slaveholder and put that at the very top of the values hierarchy of Thomas Jefferson as a man. And if you're going to do that, then that's how you're going to see him. But when he says it would be a direct attack on the symbol of the democratic values of New Yorkers, that's the whole point. That's why these things are being pulled down and taken away. It's not an unconscious act. This is a very conscious act. This is the driving force behind critical race theory and critical social justice. It is to take away liberal democracy. And race is the vehicle to get those that support critical race theory and critical social justice, to get them to that end, to that destination. The Princeton professor goes on. Willents says the statue specifically honors Jefferson for his greatest contribution to America, indeed, to humankind. The basic idea, radical then, radical now, that all men are created equal. Ironic. What does Jefferson represent? And what are the motives of those that are removing these types of icons and symbols and names from history? New York State Congressman Adriano Espaillat tweeted this in response to an NPR tweet about the Thomas Jefferson statue coming down. He simply says, good. There's no room for bigotry in New York City. What does Jefferson represent? This from a man, by the way, that in his Twitter bio says he's a former undocumented immigrant turned progressive congressman. Ironically, he says he's proudly fighting for the people. So either he and or his parents likely immigrated to the United States. Why? Why did they come to the United States? I can tell you that one of the number one reasons for him being there in the United States is because of Thomas Jefferson, who created a world that offered more opportunity to everyone. The removal of this statue is just another step toward a 1619 project. It's another step to try and erase the founding of America. It's another step to try to erase the Declaration of Independence. What is next? What's going to come next? This is the man that wrote the Declaration of Independence. But the way the media responds to this is the same way they responded to things in 2017 through 2020, especially in 2017, when all the statues were coming down, the Confederate statues. And remember President Trump at the time got up and said, look, so this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson is coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You really have to ask yourself, where does it stop? That's the same way the media is acting now. Here's a media member on Twitter. He says, how will people possibly be able to honor and recognize Thomas Jefferson now? The man who is on our currency and with a dedicated monument in our nation's capital will be forgotten without this statue no one cared about 10 years ago. How do you not see the slippery slope of this? How do you not go back to 2017, read comments from the media that said the following after these Confederate statues started coming down, and Trump said that other statues would come down of the Founding Fathers? In 2017, The Atlantic wrote, statues to slave-holding Founding Fathers would not be on the chopping block, despite the growing movement to remove anything people deemed offensive. Really. Slate said something similar in a piece that was titled, Removing Confederate Memorials Doesn't Mean Washington and Jefferson Are Next. Of course, people who know what's going on can't possibly believe that that's true when they hear the media talk about things like this. They are a buffer, right? It's just like with critical race theory and critical social justice and anything under these umbrellas, like the statues are. The media acts as a buffer to take in what they perceive as the good parts, the sympathetic, empathetic parts of social justice, and filter out the negative. That's their job. NBC News said the following, a headline that stated, statues of Washington, Jefferson aren't next. Yes, they are. Just recently in San Francisco, the names of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were voted to be removed from the city's public school board, right? The names on these buildings are now gone. The Founding Fathers of America, because they held slaves. This is a move to get rid of the founding of America. It's a move to get rid of the founding documents. It's a move to get rid of liberal democracy. That is not a crazy statement to make. It's not overstepping. It is not conspiracy theory. Those that really are in charge of organizing these things from the top and getting the momentum, the organization, the activation in place, this is their desire. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, there are a lot of pawns in the game that don't really see all of this, but you have to guess that a lot of them do. In 2020, vandals in Portland, Oregon, draped the head of a George Washington statue with the American flag and set it on fire. What are they representing? It's not just race here. That is not what's going on. Why the American flag? Why the founder, the father of America? The statue was then pulled down and spray painted with 1619 on it, which is the 1619 Project from the New York Times, a movement that is trying to replace the founding of America in 1776 and its documents and those responsible for the founding of America to a 1619 founding of America, showing that the United States was founded on slavery, 1619 being the first year that ships arrived in the transatlantic slave trade. This is not a random act in New York City with this statue. This is a group of individuals nationwide that are converted to a critical social justice religion. Removing these statues, removing these names is imperative to them. When they talk in critical race theory about adding in the right history, it's not just adding in the history for some. It's removing history as well. It's changing history. It's one thing to add in the black eyes of American history and slavery. It's another thing to try and remove history, erase it. Many of those individuals nationwide that think that this wokeness is simply on the margins need to understand that this has entered into all of the institutions of the United States. The statues are going to continue to come down. The names are going to continue to change. Street names, statues, schools, buildings. All of this is going to continue to change throughout the United States. It is a removal of the founding of America. Author and essayist Wesley Yang says the following about the significance of removing a statue like this. He says, this is done for a purpose, to declare legitimacy and deny the legitimacy of that which was replaced. What was replaced? A founding father of the United States. What was replaced? A founder of liberal democracy, a founder of the manifestation and practice of the Scottish Enlightenment, as compared to continental philosophy that has within its DNA moving to put the power to the state and not to the individual. The whole idea of the inalienable rights found in the founding documents of the United States is antithetical to critical social justice. Keep that in mind. This is the divide. When we get to the 60s, this is the divide between the civil rights movement and the radical left movement. It's the same thing. The radicals are now becoming in charge of our institutions. Race is simply a vehicle to get this done. This was attempted in previous iterations of hard leftism, such as communism and Marxism. It was a matter of changing history. It was a matter of changing language. It's a matter of moving from the principles that America are founded on, of a liberal democracy and inalienable rights for each individual, of equality for all, and moving it over to a continental philosophy that is driven by giving the power to the state. Race is just a means to an end, and it's a very effective means. Imagine, I wonder if the commission here in New York City would consider banning the Quran because Muhammad was a slave owner. Should that be removed? Or what about the Bible, where there is slavery throughout the Old Testament and somewhat in the New Testament? Do we cancel Moses and Abraham? I think that's coming. I'll end with this. This is what I think is coming. Do not be surprised in the next several years, maybe sooner, to find calls for names of streets that are named after Martin Luther King Jr. to be replaced. Statues of Martin Luther King Jr. to be removed. You say, come on, Greg, you're kidding. That's the exact direction that we're moving in. No, it's not. You have to distinguish between the civil rights movement and the radicals. We are living in the world of the radicals today, not the civil rights. The radicals will sometimes adopt civil rights and Martin Luther King if it helps them move the ball forward. But it is antithetical to those civil rights movements of the 1960s and 70s. Don't be surprised if that starts to happen. He represents assimilation. He represents colorblindness. I have a dream. He represents trying to reach to the ideals of the founding of America, of the Declaration of Independence, and a neutral U.S. Constitution, the exact opposite of what critical race theory founders want and have stated. They are against a neutral U.S. Constitution. They are against inalienable rights. They are against the Declaration of Independence. They are against liberal democracy and the founding of America. This isn't hard. It's not hard to see where this goes. In his book, 1984, George Orwell says the following, I quote, "Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Every date has been altered." 1776, 1619. "And the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has not stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right." End quote. This has almost become like a meme. We're like the frogs in the boiling water, right? That started off barely warm and has slowly heated up. And before we know it, we're going to find ourselves in a real mess. I think the way that this needs to be fought is it's got to be fought as much as possible on a local level. Stand up, regardless of being labeled a domestic terrorist, at your board meetings, at schools. Stand up in your local cities, in your counties, in your states. Or this will happen in many local areas, many cities. Don't take for granted the incredible gift that we have of the United States of America, and in the West especially, of liberal democracy. It's a rare thing in human history. And it's so easy to lose. I'll talk to you next time.